Are you prepared to defend your product and claims in front of an expert panel? If that sounds intimidating or scary, it should. And if it doesn't, maybe it should be scary. Hello again, I'm Dr. Rob and accompanied by Tami, and you're listening to the Dental Formulator's Playbook. In this episode, we're going to discuss the role of the NAD or NAD as it relates to commercial products.
Wait, you haven't talked about the NAD previously. What is that?
So NAD or NAD, whichever, it's shorthand for the National Advertising Division. Remember when we discussed the issues with marketing on oral care products that we touched on? This is going back to episode 4. Well, because the FDA lacks resources to police all products and the ADA was frustrated by the marketing puffery in the 1950s, requests and demands were made of the FTC or some other government body to help scrutinize products.
So, is the NAD a government body?
Not exactly, but it does work in conjunction with government regulatory agencies like the FTC or the FDA. It is part of the Better Business Bureau national programs that was established in 1971 as a means for the advertising industry to self-regulate in a more or less independent manner. It's important to note that the FTC or Federal Trade Commission itself can also bring challenges, so it's not just competitors bringing challenges.
So competing companies, for example, P&G and Colgate, can challenge each other if advertising claims might be suspect.
Yes, that's correct. And as you can imagine, this covers more than oral care competitors. This includes pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, financial services, and banking, and more.
Well, you don't hear about that too often.
No, not unless you're the challenger or the advertiser.
It sounds kind of like tattletale. I imagine this can quite get just quite nasty.
Yeah, indeed, and it is, because if you challenge, well, you have to recognize that you may also be in the advertiser's place if a competitor challenges you. In other words, what goes around comes around.
So what happens if a company then is sued by NAD on behalf of a competitor calling the company out, but rejects or doesn't respond to the NAD? I mean, this isn't a government agency, right?
You know what? Great question. If a challenge company fails to acknowledge the claims of the competitor, then NAD will recommend stronger action take place and recommend the non-responsive company to the FTC or the FDA. If they
Okay.
get involved,
Right. So yeah, so it behooves the challenge company to at least acknowledge and defend or explain its marketing
absolutely.
position. And to be clear, these challenges are they all based on claims?
Yeah, so claims on it's not just the packaging though. It's also on the website, social media, and the like.
Okay. Okay. So advertisement on TV,
Yep.
TikTok videos,
Yep.
YouTube,
Yep.
Amazon, all
All
of
of
this matters.
Yes, all of it does. In fact, there are obviously more marketing channels that now exist than say, I don't know, 20 years ago. But they also create more opportunities than for challenges.
Absolutely. So how common is it for oral care companies to be involved in NAD?
It's becoming very common. I remember, okay, so here's going to be a case that I'm going to talk about. I remember back in 2009, there was a very important NAD case that was brought by Cadbury Adams. They make the Trident chewing gum versus Wrigley. Everybody's heard of Wrigley. In this case, the challenger was Cadbury Adams, and the company or advertiser was Wrigley.
2009. That's 16 years ago, which in some ways seems so long ago. I'm thinking of our son.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what was the challenge based on?
Yeah, so this was curious. Wrigley had recently introduced a chewing gum that contained magnolia bark extract, also,
Oh,
also known as MBE, for those in the know.
of course you are. So magnolia bark extract, or I want to be in the know too, MBE.
MBE.
Let me guess, it has roots in maybe ancient China or something for oral health benefits.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it comes from the bark of the Magnolia officinalis tree, and the extract is either obtained by steam and hot water, by organic solvent extraction, or even by carbon dioxide supercritical fluid extraction. It has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for treatment of fevers, headaches, pain, stress relief, things like this, but it has also been shown to have some antimicrobial benefits against ulcer-based microbes in the GI tract, even acne-based microbes, and even some oral care microbes associated with disease like gingivitis. Think of the Porphyromonas gingivalis, especially good against that. And because it has such a low toxicity profile and is natural, Wrigley conducted some simple lab evaluations, did some pilot clinical testing, and decided to launch gums with this extract.
I mean, this sounds like something a company would do today,
Absolutely.
let alone
Yes.
16 years ago.
Yes.
But if we're talking about it, it sounds like it might have went sideways. What happened?
Yeah, so well, first Wrigley had to defend itself. Interestingly, at the time of this challenge, I had already left the IU School of Dentistry. Remember, I was there as a visiting faculty member, got pulled out, started an oral care company, just a small startup, by one of the former, lead guys that had retired from the School of Dentistry. But during my time there, I had overlapped with one of the faculty members who had been involved in performing those same initial antimicrobial studies for Wrigley on the magnolia bark extract. And in the end, unfortunately, upon review with the NAD and stuff, they found that those studies were wanting.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, with data, even from a well-established,
Yes.
well-respected dental school, the
Yeah.
studies were deemed not sufficient for
Yep.
the Eclipse Gums
Yep.
marketing claims.
Yeah, that's right. They weren't deemed quality enough, really. And this is
Okay.
important as it mirrors what is going on today. I mean, remove that 16 years. It sounds like something that could happen right now. Hey, I have an ingredient that has a benefit. I did some testing. Boom, I can make these claims, right? Even if they're cosmetic claims.
Right.
This was the same thing that went on 16 years ago.
Wow.
And the challenger, obviously, Cadbury Adams, had issue with specific claims, including the one that they would have, Wrigley had said it was quote unquote scientifically proven to help kill germs that cause bad breath. That scientifically proven, we're seeing that everywhere. You can go on any of these, even small brand oral care companies, even the ones that are on Amazon, it's all over the place. Scientifically proven, scientifically proven. We keep seeing this. This was the case 16 years ago, and that was the exact issue that obviously Cadbury Adams had a problem.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a number of quote unquote scientifically proven claims all over the internet from new and existing oral care companies.
Yes, in other words, it remains relevant as it did then and it is now. And I would even argue that it's even more relevant now, more important because just of the sheer numbers and the avenues and the people that have access to get these products.
Okay, so how did Wrigley respond?
Well, they said, hey, look, we got 8 scientific studies that we believe do enough to show that MBE has a benefit.
Okay, wait, so they had data because this is Wrigley, it's a big company.
Right.
They had data and they still got challenged?
Yeah, what's really interesting about this is even before this challenge, Wrigley had made quite the foray into research on saliva. They had published a
Okay.
number of studies. These were published in the Journal of the American Dental Association. I remember some of these special issues and stuff. Saliva has its benefits. So, hey, choose sugarless, chewing gum, and it can help remineralize your
Right.
teeth
You've
because it
always said
stimulates
that.
the saliva, right? So they were big proponents of that. They led a lot of these studies, not only with their own products, but they would sponsor studies all over the world in different academic centers and stuff, just to say, hey, look, we need to get this kind of data. So they presented these 8 study that you think, hey, they have everything, they have all their ducks in a row.
Right.
Everything is going to be perfect. Surely they have quality data to back up what their claims are advertising to the consumer, right?
Well, it doesn't sound like it. So, if they're there, what were the flaws? Let's talk
Well,
more specifically.
yeah. So, okay. So here was one methodology, and this was typical. I remember even participating in one of these clinical trials when I was at the School of Dentistry, where you're a volunteer and you're asked to chew the gum or mint, and then you're told to spit into a tube over the course of 5 minutes. And they would collect that kind of tube, and then whatever the contents were, and they would assess it whether it's for fluoride content, if it was a chewing gum, if it was something else that might diminish bacteria, you might count that. Maybe it's buffer capacity, calcium levels, whatever. These are collectible things that you then, make your measurements on.
Right. So, what's wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't reflect real world, does it? And here's why. Because whenever you swallow, and that's normally what happens whenever you chew gum,
Right.
not that you chew and swallow the gum, but you just chew the naturally derived
Right.
saliva
But you
that
don't
is created.
chew the gum and spit, chew the gum and
Right.
spit.
Exactly. Yeah, that was nasty, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what they say is, well, by virtue of the swallowing, then you're having a change in the interplay between the amount and the interaction then of the magnolia bark extract, the
Okay.
saliva constituents, and then also the microbes that are present. In other words, it doesn't reflect real world. Remember, whenever you're being challenged, and this is going up against an independent board, some of these boards people, that panel are going to be maybe, executives. A lot of them are going to be lawyers. Probably very few, if any, are going to be actual scientists. So trying to convince, some of these the business types, or even a lawyer to be like, hey, you chew gum and then you spit. It's gonna be hard to get that over the goal line, you
That
know?
makes sense though.
I mean, that's like a low bar. They're like, wait a minute, but you chew
That's
gum and you
usually
don't
what
spit.
happens, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
while that was helpful maybe for getting some data,
Hmm.
it's not real world. So
Okay,
they
so
threw that out. They said, nope, can't do that.
what else?
So sometimes if you're trying to figure out if the gum is going to be able to release its bioavailable component, maybe you want to pre-dissolve that first and then do certain kind of assessments.
Okay, so I can see that.
Yeah, you can see that it wouldn't pass, right? Because you don't pre-dissolve,
Well, exactly.
nobody pre-dissolves mints or chewing gums, right? It almost sounds like,
Icky.
yeah, well, it sounds like, but then it also sounds curious because you're like, wait a minute, you have to stop and think, wait a minute, pre-dissolve that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that was one that was thrown out.
So,
Another comparison was between a flavorless gum that had magnolia bark extract and one that had magnolia bark extract but also had flavoring.
oh, okay, wait a minute. So the flavoring itself might be because there's two differences, right? So the flavor itself might also be contributing to the germ kill activity.
That is what the NAD people found. They said, yep, the control gum should have included flavoring, but no magnolia bark
And
extract.
this is something that you've said often that whatever it is you're evaluating should be the only difference.
Yeah, that's right. Just
Right.
remove the so-called active ingredient
Right.
just so that we know. Yep.
Okay.
So that's
So,
what the NAD board said. They said,
so
yep. So they
yeah,
threw
because
that
of
one out.
common sense, right?
Common sense.
Right. So what else?
Well, once Cadbury challenged Wrigley, then Wrigley decided to conduct some additional studies.
A little too late, right? I mean, the ads were already being made about germ killing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were already made. They said, wait a minute, you already had all of your marketing materials. This was already in print. You already had advertisements put on in, magazines and stuff, right?
Hmm.
It was already circulating on the internet, right? Well, you can't go back, it's like trying, yeah,
Retrospectively.
it's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. It's no, it's already out, buddy.
Yeah.
You done the squeezing and you
Right.
created the mess. So what's going on? So they threw that out.
So far, it makes sense. What is there anything else?
Oh yeah, definitely. Some of the other studies that were done prior to Cadbury initially challenging them, and again,
Okay.
Cadbury challenged them, Wrigley appealed, and then a final ruling happened, and that's why
Okay.
there was like a little bit of gap in between, hey, we challenged, where did all these studies come from and everything else. So, Wrigley was trying to respond to the initial, claim, hey, look, you don't have quality data. And so then they conducted some data and then, obviously it was revisited. I mean, you only get really two shots. You get the initial response to rebuff whatever claims or challenges to those claims that are being
Hmm.
made, and then there's the final decision. So you only go up against the board twice. So you go up the first and you get rejected. Chances are, if you appeal it, it's not always, but it's more likely you're going to lose. So anyway, the next one to make them lose, the value of this other test was that Cadbury Adams said, it looks like you kind of, we're looking at the results and some of the stats and some things just aren't adding up. Yeah.
That
So
sounds like it was quote unquote
yeah.
cooked. I mean,
Yeah.
it
I
was
mean,
manipulated
yeah, sometimes
to
that
show
happens.
favorable outcomes. What it
Yeah.
sounds like. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't know whether it was or wasn't, obviously I don't have access to, to that exact data, but if it had the appearance of it,
Right.
and if there's already
Perception.
other studies that are
Right.
being thrown out for X, Y, and Z reasons, it's probably not going to help. Yeah, so that was another one. There was also another test that a couple of them that looked at prototype chewing gum and not actually the end product that was being marketed. So
Okay, wait. So
yeah.
So they were only really evaluating the prototypes and not at best and not even the end product is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, absolutely. So, if you're going to have, your final version of whatever product you're making, that's the one that you want to do all your testing on, not the preliminary stuff, not the prototyping where, hey, let's try the different flavors and maybe one of these, but that ends up not making into the final run. You have to do the final one
Yeah.
that you're launching with. Now, there was also another issue. So, in terms of the claims, where they were talking about magnolia bark extract having a benefit, Wrigley went further and they said, quote unquote, most other gums just mask bad breath. So just that statement alone,
That got challenged as
that
well.
got challenged alone. Why? Because they didn't do any tests to show that most other gums mask bad breath.
Okay.
So that seemingly innocuous statement right there that has
Right.
absolutely nothing to do with magnolia bark
Yeah,
extract
there are much
or
stronger statements
yeah,
today.
or their marketed gum, yeah, chewing gum. So that's interesting. So here's why I'm going to liken that. If somebody says most other toothpaste have toxic ingredients that are bad for you, ours does not. Do you think that would pass muster with an ad? Hell,
No.
no way. In fact, no way. In
A
fact,
lot of the newcomers say that.
that's what they're all saying. Again, this is why we're talking about this.
Okay.
We need to educate because there's just not a lot of good education out there right now. Or if there is, it's just being completely ignored, about, what you need to do or not need to do. But again, this is a very serious thing. The NAD is very serious. In the end, this is what they told Wrigley. They said, look, you have promising data, but you're just not there yet. You need to have some better assessments. However, you're going to get that. But they even offered Wrigley like a pathway out. They say in your marketing, if you want to say that there is emerging evidence that magnolia bark extract or MBE might have a nice ability to kill germs that cause bad breath, hey, you could maybe say that. I don't think that that was strong enough for Wrigley because that necessarily would say then maybe others could also use the same generic language. Hey, there is emerging evidence that MBE. Imagine, I mean, how are you going to differentiate then?
So ultimately, this
Yeah.
product got pulled,
Oh
right?
yeah, no, yeah. This thing was pulled, and Wrigley acknowledged the decision. They respectfully disagreed with it, but they did pull the product. This was a
That's a lot of
this
money that went
wasn't
into
just the
that.
product, yeah, because it also resulted in a class action suit as well from consumers. So whenever you see a NAD challenge, look out because something else could be coming along the way. It also affected those relationships. So I know this because of my familiarity with the scientists that were involved, and even my one of my late mentors, he was involved. There was some lack of interest in moving forward and working with certain people from thenceforth.
Oh,
So there could be some relationship damaging, stuff. That's a little unfortunate, but it's very real. I mean, if all of a sudden the studies aren't there, now, it's not the university's responsibility to like have a product. You have to have a
right,
very clear direction. And sometimes if you have somebody that doesn't have that, kind of
right.
idea, that direction, whether
Almost
they're
sounds
in the
like a
company
scapegoat.
or even somebody else, yeah, then it's easy to say, hey, well, we're not going to work with so and so because they didn't do this. Look, it happens, right? Yeah,
Right.
people are humans. Things are made mistakes, but whenever things are costing millions of dollars of jobs and all that other stuff, it tends to be a little
Let's
bit,
have to roll.
yeah, I mean, that's just
Okay,
what happens.
but you bring up a really good point about the National Advertising Division. It clearly it's something you should be aware of and should take seriously, basically. So what do you recommend?
Yeah, so there exists an updated recommendation. I say updated. This is from December 2022.
Well, for government,
So, I mean,
it's updated.
yeah, it just is. And this was done by the Federal Trade Commission, and this is for health-based claims. Notably, to me, whenever I review this overlaps with some of the requirements of the American Dental Association's seal of approval for a specific ailment, whether that's, for instance, caries or, erosion, even sensitivity, and even bad breath. And this overlap is likely based on what experts would require for health benefit claims. What do you think that might be?
Well, when I was in pharma sales, we were instructed to highlight publications or studies that involved randomized controlled trials or RCTs.
RCTs, yes, this is ideally what the FTC would like to see for products with health claims. Absolutely.
But surely companies do not do this as for absolutely everything because this can get quite costly in terms of time and money.
Yeah, and and there's risk level. What happens if it's not going to give you the outcome that you were hoping for? All of a
Right,
sudden, lack of
right.
time, there's momentum, investors get irritated. It's everybody gets. I mean, there's a lot of things.
People just want the product on the market.
Yeah, they just want the product on the market. Now the NAD board, they even say, and even the FTC, they say, look, if you can do one RCT, that's great. If you can get a replicate done by somebody independent, that's
Mhm.
even better because we need that kind of evidence. But they ultimately underline the importance of the quality of the study and not necessarily the quantity. Some people are going to be like, oh, haven't you seen all these reviews, for instance, of this product or this product having a great, yeah, but it's the quality, man.
Yeah,
It's
if you
not
put
the
eight crap
quantity.
ones out there, then
Yeah,
it's not
exactly.
not nearly like one quality one. So you did mention though, these RCTs or randomized clinical
Yep.
trials, they should
Yep.
all be independent, right? Just want to stress that.
Yeah, they should be. Ideally that is what they would like to look at. And, whenever you're talking about the randomized, what does randomized means? That's really referring to the subject, the volunteer involved in that clinical trial.
Okay.
You want to be inclusive, really. What are your races, genders, your ages, even
Mm-hmm.
if you can get socio-demographic, kind of, aspects of that, representation from the different levels.
Mm-hmm.
That would be helpful. Obviously, it's not possible to do that all the time, but you just don't want to do that on just the one particular race, one gender at
Right.
one particular age. Just don't be doing
Make it as
things
real
like
life
that.
as possible.
Yes, exactly. So, in other words, the design needs to be of high quality. You have to have a proper control. And control, whenever the FTC talks about this, some other, agencies will talk about this. Usually they just say control. What they really mean is more of a placebo or what I like to call a negative control. I like to actually call it out. What kind of control is it? Because there's also studies that involve a positive control. And the FDA actually uses some studies that use positive control. So you would have to have a negative control and a positive control. The FTC, just like the American Dental Association, they're not too high on the positive controls. You should at least use negative controls.
Okay. So talking about negative control, what would you consider a quote unquote appropriate negative control?
Ideally, the exact same formulation as you already mentioned earlier here, but one that lacks the so-called active ingredients, quote unquote.
Okay, so that's a major point too.
Yep.
We've touched on it before in different episodes, but I mean, the way you often talk about lab studies, let alone clinical studies, not having the quote unquote appropriate control is really
Oh my God.
what qualifies it as a quality study versus
Yeah,
not.
let's talk about a recent paper that was published 2025 in the Journal of Dentistry. This one's going to be a good one to look at. We're not going to get too much into the details because we don't have to. But it was trying to tout the benefits of nano-hydroxyapatite in remineralizing caries lesions, okay, in a lab study. Now, ordinarily, that might be an okay thing to do. However, they looked at two fluoride toothpaste and then six hydroxyapatite, nano-hydroxyapatite containing toothpaste. The two fluoride toothpaste were at different levels. One was over the counter level at 0.24%, and one was prescription strength at
Okay.
1.1%. Clinically, the 1.1%, not necessarily that particular toothpaste, but just in general, gives you a strong dose response relative to over the counter level toothpaste.
You would expect.
Yeah, you would expect that. That's what you want to look at. This paper, for instance, and we're going to get into it to a minute. I claim, this is my claim, right? Yeah, it can be reviewed or not. This was a very poor study, absolutely poor study. You're obviously sensing that
Yeah, clearly you have an issue with
that
the paper. So
yeah, that I have this.
so tell
But
me about it.
there were no differences between the two fluoride toothpaste in the study. So that you didn't get a so-called dose response. So clinically, you get that. 0.24 affords about maybe a 24% reduction in caries incidence. A 1.1% sodium fluoride prescription strength on average gives about a 75% reduction in caries incidence.
So you're saying that's already been
That's already been proven. It's already been
proven out in
proven. There are
clinical
so
trials?
many, yeah, there are so many reviews and stuff.
Lab.
But in the lab study, there
They didn't
was,
find any difference
oh,
between
dude,
the
they were
two.
they were almost numerically the same. Not only
That
not only statistically the same, but they were almost numerically the same. So that kind of hints at there's something wrong or not optimized with the model, right?
right, because we know clinically, even as you said, there is clearly a difference between normal over-the-counter levels of fluoride and prescription levels of fluoride, as you just
Absolutely.
described.
Yeah, and so that's just what it goes. And the paper also concluded that the nano-hydroxyapatite has potential caries benefit, right? That was one of them. In order to be able to get to that kind of claim, and there was, or I think that they even said that maybe that. that particular, like only one of the it was weird. It was weird. Okay. So if it sounds confusing, it was confusing because
Trying to
there
follow.
were six nano-hydroxyapatite toothpaste that were evaluated, two fluorides. The fluorides weren't different from another. Most of the other toothpaste weren't different from another, from one
Even
another.
though they were clearly different
Oh
strengths,
my
they didn't
God.
show a
They
difference.
had so many different strengths, but even before that, and we're going to talk about that in
Okay.
in just a second, but the study had no negative control. It had no, or if you just want to call it a regular just control, it had no negative control.
You need
Yeah,
so the basics.
the baseline, there was no baseline response.
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
in general, so you can have placebo effects, for instance, in clinical trials. People know about this, right? They'll say, oh,
Hmm.
yeah. And usually that refers to like the belief, somebody's belief that, hey, I'm
Hmm.
taking something, I think it's going to do good. We call that a placebo
It's
effect,
very
if
real.
that's going to have an effect. There's also such thing, maybe some people don't know this. It's called a Hawthorne effect, where all of a sudden somebody's more aware of the treatments than all of a sudden they're on. It's almost like those that are
Okay.
now in a clinical study, all of a sudden they're going to start paying more attention to, okay, I'm going to make sure I brush my teeth for 2 minutes. I'm going to make sure I don't rinse out my mouth.
Okay.
I'm going to, now that I'm in a clinical study, I'm going to try not to have those kinds of foods that might give a bad outcome. I'm going to try to limit my sweets or something. That is
Awareness.
known as the Hawthorne effect.
Okay.
And that's especially in that, I mean, these are non-small effects. The Hawthorne effect can be up to like 40% in
Wow.
hypersensitivity trials. Like, so if you have a product that you're going to address for hypersensitivity, you have to overcome, a negative control, maybe even a positive control. It depends, okay, on why you're doing this and where, like if it's for the FDA
Right.
versus like the ADA or something. And you have to, make sure that you're accounting for these placebo effects and the Hawthorne effect
Wow.
in your study design. How do you do that? Well, there's different ways, and that's not for right now,
But
but that is one of the things that you look at.
okay, but this lab study, and they didn't have, therefore, they wouldn't have a placebo effect
Yeah,
or a
right.
Hawthorne effect.
Right. So somebody may say, "Hey, well, this is a lab study. We don't have placebo or Hawthorne effect." Right.
You're
But you
aware.
still have an underlying outcome, and you're
Yes.
still trying to assess products based on remineralization. In this particular study, it was based on remineralization. Well, what drives our remineralization naturally in our mouth?
Saliva.
Exactly. So they did not have a saliva only group that would give that underlying baseline, effect of what is the role of saliva.
Okay.
And if not saliva, then a saliva substitute. I mean, this
Right.
is normal practice. If you don't have that kind of underlying feature, we don't know what the underlying response is. For instance, they did this model out to 14 days. What if 14 days was too long for the high fluoride and it was great for maybe the hydroxyapatite and low fluoride? Maybe after 5 days, the high fluoride all of a sudden did the maximum that it could do in this
Got
particular
there
model.
quickly.
Yeah, and then it was just sat there for the next, 9 days while everything else caught up. And all of a sudden,
Okay.
hey, this is a let's look at the study. I've seen these things happen. It happens oftentimes.
And that
You
must be the
know,
danger between the lab and the clinical, though.
that is, and this is also a danger of not fully vetting your lab study.
Okay.
So the problem is you also don't have a negative control, so we don't know what the underlying response would be over the course of those 14 days.
Which
Like,
is why you would have one.
yeah, so put a negative control in and then
Okay.
monitor out, 5 days, 10 days, and then 14 days. Measure all
Right.
the metrics there. And then, you still don't have a dose response. So you still can't get your fluoride groups to break. These are the ailments that end up making a study that might seem like it's great,
Hmm.
but nobody dives into the details. I'm sure whoever, the sponsor of the study is like, hey, this is what's going to go on and we're going to advertise like crazy.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, because once you're challenged, and you will be challenged in the future, eventually you will be, because the National Advertising Division is very alive with challengers all the time,
And it's
taking
growing
on.
in the oral care
It's
industry.
growing. Oh my God,
Noted.
it's so much more significant. So, yeah, there
Okay.
are just so many companies that are just wanting to challenge. If for no other reason, they want to learn. We'll do a test on one of them, but Guru Nanda is probably one of the companies that I think challenges just because they want to know. Like
Okay.
they don't know what the heck and
That's
how the
one
heck
thing to learn.
some of these companies are advertising. Like, okay, how are you whitening teeth? How are you calling, the microbiome?
That's
And
one way
you
to
know,
gain
that's the
information.
way to gain. You just keep on doing this and you lose, and it gets an
Okay.
expensive way. I don't think that that's the best way. I think there's probably another good way, but
Okay, but this lab
yeah,
study
this lab study. Yeah,
didn't,
go
because the
ahead.
negative control wasn't used, and we really don't know the degree to which the model was sensitive to
Sure.
basic remineralization, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's one of the flaws. Yep.
So what would go into quality then?
Well, with respect to this kind of model, and somebody, out there listening who might be a fan of nano-hydroxyapatite, they may say, well, I don't care if the fluoride dose response wasn't there. What about nano-hydroxyapatite? Then you would say, okay, well, the whole argument about nano-hydroxyapatite, the whole mystique about it, the unknown is how much do I use?
Oh, it's all over the board, isn't it?
How much do I use? And so then you start thinking to yourself, well, then if you're going to have a quality model that's going to assess something like this, like a nanohydroxyapatite,
Right.
and you just want to throw in fluoride because you're just trying to play up and say, hey, you're trying to satisfy those experts who might be fluoride based and say, hey, this,
Six different
you look at
nanohydroxy.
six different
Okay.
ones, then you might think, well, heck, maybe the model might be sensitive to that to then nanohydroxyapatite level.
That makes sense.
So
Okay.
what do you think? Think it was?
I'm guessing
Hell
no.
no. You had three different brands. There was no actual placebo brand at all. You had three different brands. One had 5%, one had 20%, one had 15%. Guess what? They were all statistically similar. So even if somebody were to say, look, you don't have a negative control, yeah, that's pretty unforgivable. It's not going to pass muster with the NAD. What about a fluoride dose response? Well, it doesn't have that. What about a nanohydroxyapatite? There's no dose response. Nowhere, anywhere.
Okay, so
This is a hodgepodge
yeah,
of flipping data.
if I understand correctly, all those different levels of nano HA, which you said goes anywhere from 5% to 20%,
Yeah.
basically all perform the same.
Yeah, statistically, maybe there's some directional trending, but it doesn't matter because
Those are
they
huge
they
differences.
actually assessed and they looked at this. One thing that I did like about the study is they tried to figure out, well, how many specimens should we put in the study? And so they did their pre-experiment. Again,
Okay.
on paper, it all looks good. But again, if the model
Hmm.
is a pig, you can put lipstick on it. It's still a
Yes.
pig. I mean, it ain't, you don't
Yes.
even have an underlying group, an underlying control group. So too bad. But I would imagine that the study sponsor, whose product, by the way, did directionally better than all the other nano-hydroxyapatite. Yeah,
King.
shocking, right? That's pretty interesting. I'm sure they will make some claims. I'm sure they will write about it. I'm sure it'll be somewhere and they'll say, see, we told you it's about this and it's about that. And honestly, before they go overboard, I mean, they can, hey, it's their company. They can do whatever they want to do. But in the end, if you're doing well enough, and what do we mean by well enough? If you're having the commercial success that you think that you should have or that you have gained, however you've gotten it, you're gonna get challenged by, the venue, if you will, by the court of the National Advertising Division. Again, they're not going to bring it necessarily. It's going to be a competitor.
Right,
These are
because
competitors
they don't want
operating
their
in the
market
space.
share being taken.
Exactly. And they're going to protect that at all costs. And so, and all it takes, and there are plenty of them. There are so many. I mean, Procter and Gamble and Colgate are always challenged, and they have
Wow.
deeper pockets than some of these other smaller entities that
Indeed,
make sense.
indeed. Okay, so
Yeah. Anyway.
there's no dose response with respect to fluoride. There's no dose
Yeah.
response with respect to the nano HA. There's no negative control.
No.
If I understand correctly, this study would be thrown out by the national board if a challenger was to call it out,
Yep,
correct?
that's right. Yep.
Okay.
So, and that's where it is. So I think this is always going to be a problem. These things are living beasts. I like to like talk about like the businesses and the marketing efforts. These are living beasts. What you're doing now or what you did 5 years from now will come back on you if
Yeah.
they're not supported, or even if they are supported, you better, tighten things up.
So why
It's
do you
just a
think
beast.
that these challenges are increasing more over the last 5 to
Yeah,
10
I
years?
I think I think a large part of the problem is the underappreciation for the regulatory differences around the world, which may sound like what? Like what does that have to do with the net or marketing or anything else? Well, it's because, for instance, in Europe, toothpaste is considered cosmetic, even if it has fluoride in it, and here in the US,
It's a drug.
it's a drug. So
That's a huge difference.
that's a huge difference. And so oftentimes, a lot of these brands are looking outside, what's going on in South Korea? What's the new thing going on in Indonesia? What's coming out of Italy? We
Hmm.
want to know. And we want to put that in because it makes the brand sound sexy or have the
Hmm.
latest ingredient. And honestly, you still have to test it. And
Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it has to meet US
exactly.
standards.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, everybody wants in the US market. It's the best market to be
Mm.
in. I mean, we don't have the largest, population base here, but we have the largest free market. opportunities,
Right.
vehicles, and the regulatory environment. While some may view it as strict, and it is amongst the strictest in the entire world, it still has opportunities and availabilities for those that want to be in it. There's
Mhm.
already rules in place. If you want to use
Right.
fluoride toothpaste, you can do that. In fact, the FDA even gives you a monograph to say, "Hey, look, just follow this, and you can market all you want."
Right.
There's a lot of differences. And it's funny because in Europe, like there's more of an emphasis on preservatives. Having that to make sure you don't have microbiological
Which
contamination.
is good.
Here in the US, I think it's getting better, but the scrutiny on whether your product has sufficient preservatives in there to prevent
Hmm.
microbial growth, like mold, for instance.
Yeah.
And we've seen images on that and some of
Yeah.
our, things. I mean, it's pretty funny.
And there's a big push for
There's a,
preservative
yeah,
free.
preservative free, but
I would prefer preservatives than mold
yeah,
personally.
yeah, yeah, right. I mean,
That's all I'm saying.
so it comes back to just understanding the market in which you're playing in. If you're playing in the
Hmm.
US market, even if it's international and stuff, please understand what those rules are,
Yeah.
and know that just because you might be maybe you pass, microbiological contamination, maybe you're not using fluoride and you're using other things that might be construed as a cosmetic, you're still going to get challenged because your competitor has a vehicle called the National Advertising Division to
Right.
take you to task. You
Right.
know,
So, in essence, it all comes back to what you've always said: responsibly develop your products.
that's it.
This includes not only sufficient, but appropriate testing.
Yeah, and in the end, it's so important for the consumer and the company. I mean, such testing, although it is unfortunately overlooked in this space, it can really improve the trust in and the loyalty of a company. I mean, this is why your legacy companies like Procter& and Gamble, Colgate, Haleon, et cetera, they continue to innovate and lead these spaces. It's not because they're not interested in new ideas, right? It's not because, hey, they don't have nano-hydroxyapatite. Oh my gosh, these legacy companies are too stupid and slow. That's not the reason. In fact, Colgate has patents on nano-hydroxyapatite in the oral care space.
They're more thorough.
But the point is, they have to make sure that everything's buttoned up
Hmm.
because they're the ones that are going to be challenged, right?
Absolutely.
So they have to, develop, fully vet their
Hmm.
products, and it's just resource intensive. It is because why? Because they're not going to be here. Somebody's thinking, well, I just want to hurry up, get this. I've heard of this before. Oh my God, I've talked to people. We just want a quick win. The company just wants
Yeah.
a quick win. I remember I had to work with one such company. We just want a quick win. We just want a quick win. And I told them, no, you're gonna have a product because you have to prove out that there's a need.
Yeah. And you're going to have to do
Where's
it
your
the right
perfect match?
way.
Have to do it the right way. Takes a long time. You can do that. Some people are just like, I just want to get in and get out, and then that's it.
They want quick money.
Dude, you know
That's what
what?
quick win means. They want
Well, I
quick
know it's
money.
it's right there, but you have to take your time. You have to do it the right way.
Hmm.
If you are truly interested in creating a
A
brand
quality
that is
product.
going to be here in 10, 20 years, even if it is going to be acquired, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can aspire to that, but
Hmm.
make sure your ducks are in a row, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely. So clearly, I know sometimes it seems like we're beating a dead horse, but these are really important points. You need to get your product appropriately tested, not just tested.
yes, and quality models.
Yes.
Quality models are really important.
You can always rely on those expert advice or
Yeah.
reviews or
Yeah.
tangential publications or
Yeah.
even to support your product. Even more, just because something is patented, and this is for everybody listening, just because something is patented or patent pending, that doesn't mean it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And those reviews on, nano-hydroxyapatite, whatever all this is, or other ingredients, those are just those in front of a panel. And we mentioned at the beginning of the show, you're talking to executives and lawyers, especially.
Hmm.
And you're not only that, but you're being called on the carpet by your competitor. And your competitor who's calling you on the carpet, they very well might know the ins and outs of the business and they might have all their ducks in a row. So they're
Right.
going to sit there and they will help, those executives and those lawyers come to whatever decision they're going to make. And
Of
they're going to
course.
say, okay, so tell me what testing you've done. Now let's
Hmm.
look at those tests,
Hmm.
just like what we talked about earlier
Right.
in the show. So, okay. So with that, all right. So we introduced the National Advertising Division. I think that was pretty important. We haven't done so yet. We're going to be touching more on that. I know we like to do formula forensics. Sometimes we call out certain topics that we see, maybe ingredients. I think we're going to do that also with the National Advertising Division just because I think it's very helpful. Why is it helpful? Because it helps shape what your claims are and what support might be needed for that. So we'll take more, case studies in looking at that as we move forward.
And it sounds like they focus on the more common sense, real life, provable stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, get your stuff tested. I mean, obviously they want randomized control trials, and most who doesn't want that? Of course they're
Right.
going to say that that's pie in the sky. But even for a fluoride format here in the US, you don't even have to have randomized clinical trials. That's the advantage of the monograph. It says, okay, these are the levels of fluoride. This is the format of fluoride. Now, you do have to still do some testing with that fluoride. Just do this testing. Honestly, the testing is really low bar. It's mostly lab based, it's not clinical based. And you can then be confident that you have a product, if you're using fluoride, that does well. If it's something else, well, then we have to get creative. Then we have to say, okay, what are your claims? What would you like to say? Make a list, make a list of your ingredients. In fact, I just had, a consultation with some potentially new clients just the other day. And this is just what I tell them. What are the claims that you would like to make? Even
You
if
always
you're,
want to start with the claims, right?
start with what the claim and then let's work backwards. What
Hmm.
do you think that we need to get there? And we're gonna likely need to build a portfolio. It's not just going to be one study and then you're done. We're going to need to say, okay, what is that portfolio? What does that look like? In case eventually we hope that you have such great success that a competitor comes up and challenges you and that challenger might be wrong. They might, which is often the case, right? Guru Nanda is a great example of that. They go up against these titans. Sometimes they win out, most of the time they lose, but they're learning something,
Yes.
So there's other ways to do that instead of, trying to
Putting your
enter into
junk out there.
litigation. Yeah, there is other ways of doing that. So that's all basically what we're really trying to do with the whole series here, trying to educate and trying to help. So, and trying to shed light on
Hmm.
what is needed and stuff. All right. So with that, that actually concludes this show. We thank you for listening. And, alongside Tami, I'm Dr. Rob. And yeah, we just appreciate the listeners and the commenters. We have gotten a couple other commenters, and we'll probably address some of those requests. Sometimes we can't do all those things, but I think last episode we did, and we're going to continue to do that. All right, and with that, we check out. Stay curious, keep smiling. Bye bye.